So hello, everyone. I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. We're very excited for this opportunity. This is going to be one of a series of workshops that will be happening every Wednesday from this month through the next 5 months. They'll be called Wellness Wednesdays, and tonight's workshop is called Practical Tips to Keep Kids Safe Online. And I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Kristen Mao. I'm a parent of a 7th grader and an 11th grader, and I'm the PTA president at Kanapaha Middle School, as well as the family engagement chair for the Alachua County PTA. Also on here tonight is Mary Benedict, who is the Alachua County Council PTA president, and Megan Hendricks, who is the Vice President and Legislative Chair. So thank you for joining us. So tonight's workshop will provide an overview of the current challenges in online safety, as well as provide tips and steps that families can take to help keep their kids safe online and promote healthy social media use. When we were trying to decide what a really pressing topic was to bring attention to our families, this one just stood out in the forefront. The lots of local PTA leaders were having discussions with school administrators. We were having discussions with parents, and given what has been happening in recent times when kids have not been able to be in person, everybody's had to rely a lot more on online interactions, whether it be for school, for social purposes. And it is just, this is a huge need to educate and bring awareness to families on how to talk with their children about using social media safely. So given all of that, we are so excited to have 2 experts on the topic. We have Dr. Jennifer Doty, who is an assistant professor in family, youth, and community science at UF. Her research is built around the idea that parent-child relationships and technology are key leverage points for improving adolescent health and well-being. Thank you, Dr. Doty. And I'm also excited to announce that we have Dr. Joy Gabrielli. She's an assistant professor in the Clinical Health and Psychology Department at UF, and her research centers on identifying environmental risk factors for adolescent youth behaviors. She developed an interest in applications of digital technologies to address prevention and treatment needs, and to support parents in media management in the home setting. So definitely they have got a lot of insight and knowledge about these topics. So the one thing I wanted to say before we get to it is I mentioned a little bit earlier that we will be having this workshop be kind of split into 40 minutes of presentation. There may be questions at that time. You can certainly type them in the chat. We may be able to try and address some of those questions in the first 40 minutes, but the second or the 20 minutes toward the end will be a discussion portion. So you can raise your hand at that time. If you'd prefer to type them in the chat, that works as well. But I wanted to let you know the format, that it'll be mostly presentation at the beginning, and then the end will allow for a non-recorded discussion portion. So we are happy to be able to bring this to you. The Alachua County PTA has been collaborating a lot with our school administrators and our 2 professors that are here tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to let you take it away.
Oh, you're muted. Thank you so much.
That would be helpful. Yeah, thank you for having us. The first thing I want to mention is that both Joy and I are parents ourselves. Our kids are in the Alachua County school districts. My kids are a little bit older. They're in the teenage years and now transitioning into young adult years. And Joy's daughter is younger. And so we're not just talking to you from a research point of view, but we're also talking to you from the vantage point of being parents ourselves.
Can I also
So,
add that we
yeah, go ahead.
we also use technology to promote mental health and wellness through our various interventions and the work that we do, as well as in our homes. So we want to make it clear we're going to be talking about internet related risks, but there's also a lot of really positive things that come from the advancements we've seen in technology. And so we're hoping to present a little bit of a balanced perspective on how to integrate technology into the lives of your family in a way that's safe and promotes adaptive outcomes for kids.
Yeah, that comment actually goes really well with my first few slides, Joy, because I was at a conversation last weekend with a bunch of teenagers, and they were super excited when I told them that the research actually does not show a connection between the number of hours teenagers spend online and mental health and well-being, which might be surprising to a lot of you. But we've been following this research for a little while now. And even though the numbers of hours that our teenagers are spending online is kind of shocking, this slide actually shows you that tweens, so kids ages 8 to 12, are spending almost 5 hours of their waking hours on screens. And that doesn't include their homework. And that was before the pandemic. This was 2019 data. And then the teenagers, 13 to 18 years old, they are spending almost 7.5 hours of their waking hours on screens. And again, that doesn't include their homework. So let me just throw this out here for a minute. You feel free to unmute or go ahead and put this into the chat. But why do you think that screen time in general isn't correlated with mental health? You would almost expect that it would be. I'm curious to see what you all think, and I'll tell you if it matches the teenagers I talked with. So put it in the chat or feel free to unmute.
I'll unmute and say that actually my son uses the computer for a lot of his socializing, and it brings him immediate interaction with his peers, and you can hear him laughing and talking and while on his computer.
Yeah, so some chat messages are coming in. Kids are interacting with friends. That seems to be good. It's allowing them to connect with others. And during the pandemic, honestly, that was like one of the only ways that they were connecting with others. So that was a really important way to actually help their mental health. Mm-hmm. And so let me go back to our presentation here.
Can I say something, a comment real quick? Yeah. This is Elizabeth. I'm a parent of a middle schooler at Kanapaha. And I also have an older daughter who is 22 now, and she was at Kanapaha when, you know, social media and the smartphones just started kind of emerging. And so when you ask the question of whether or not, you know, I am surprised or if I kind of am convinced that, you know, the internet, I know it's changed since she's been, you know, the middle schooler, but I think her age in particular in that particular period was really, it affected her, you know, because it was a new era, I guess you could say, for a lot of us as parents. You know, I had to like the phone and the apps and the social media, and it was just a whole new realm of parenting that I think, I mean, we've made advancements, but it was just, it affected, I think, her. So I don't know, maybe it's a gender thing, but also, like a cultural thing where we're learning more about it. So I'm really confused. That's why I'm attending this, because my son is in 7th grade. So
I think it's interesting that you said your daughter, when she was in middle school, was really affected. And so one of the things that we're finding is that even though on the whole, there isn't this really stark difference between ours and mental health, that for different subgroups, there is a difference. And one of the groups that does have a difference is girls in their early middle school years. And for example, one of the things that we found is that, and this isn't our research in particular, Joy's and I's, but this is out there in the research world, that body image for young girls has been going down over the last decade. And the same is not true for boys. And that is particularly true among younger girls. And they are also more at risk for depression when they're on screens quite a bit. And those two things we're continuing to explore how related those are. But if you think about it, those are the puberty years, right? And there's a lot of images or a lot of pressure for girls to look sexy and to have a perfect image on Instagram. And so this picture of a magnifying glass really shows us that whatever they're experiencing in their life, if they're experiencing insecurity as a young girl going through puberty in a very high pressure, image conscious society, that gets magnified online. And so that means that if a child goes and they're depressed, and there was actually just a recent, what we call a meta-analysis, where it was a study of all the studies that have been done. And there was a recent study that said, if you're depressed and you spend a lot of time online, then that depression gets magnified by like quite a bit, by like 10 times more. And that those youth are more likely to have suicide ideation and potentially commit suicide or try to commit suicide. So that's one of the things that we're seeing, is that it depends on what's going on in the child's life. Another example.
We're also learning just the fact that some of these platforms themselves are designed to have algorithms that shape you towards your interests. And if your interests tend to be oriented towards negative content, the algorithms are going to point you further and further down the path of more negative content. And this will be a theme that we touch on multiple times, but a driving, take-home point should be it's content. It's content online that we need to be thinking about and monitoring for our kids.
Yeah. So I want to go back to Joy's earlier point too, that it's not all negative. Those algorithms and the online environment also magnify positive interests. So if you have a kid who's interested in advocacy or the environment, and they want to do some advocacy around the environment, the algorithms will feed that interest. If they creativity is another really positive outcome. So when kids are online and they are being creative and creating content and using code and video, editing videos, that can actually be a really positive outcome, and their mental health may get better as they gain confidence in some of those really critical technology skills that honestly will help them with the future technological careers that will be available to them, And so we don't want to stifle internet use, because then we're also stifling those positive outcomes as well. Another example is pro-social behavior. Kids who are in a good mood and they go online and they compliment their friends and they lift other people up, they tend to benefit socially, as many of you said in the chat earlier. So it's not that internet is all bad, it's that it's a magnifier for the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so it really brings out the extremes in both ourselves and our youth. So I think that's all I have to say on that one. Let's go over here to online risks. I do want to talk about some of the types of online risks.
All of y'all's dinner's on the table.
that are out there. And one of them is mature content. And I'm going to borrow a metaphor that I got from Joy. She's got this really wonderful metaphor where if we were in a place where there was a lot of people and a lot of people we didn't know, and we're with our 8-year-old child, there's no way we would send them into a room in a public place with a bunch of strangers and shut the door and just let them spend a few hours, right? We just wouldn't do that because it would be dangerous to our kids. And they could really be exposed to content that's not good for them. But we do that all the time online. And Joy will talk about in just a minute some of the advertising effects on youth that happen when they're exposed to some of this mature content, because there are companies that are literally gunning for our youth in terms of trying to get them into mature content. Cyberbullying is really the area that I spend a lot of time in, and about 2/3 of youth report that they have been involved in cyberbullying or that they see cyberbullying around them. We also know that while screen time is not related to mental health outcomes, cyberbullying is. When kids are exposed to online harassment and cyberbullying, and anecdotally, we hear a lot of this going on right now in the schools. One of the school counselors said every single incident that they've had with bullying this year has had a cyber component. I know Joy is seeing this in the clinic, but we do know that cyberbullying is definitely really related to self-harm outcomes. And so when a child talks about cyberbullying or mentions cyberbullying, that's something we should take seriously. We should also be aware that kids don't often report cyberbullying because they don't want mom and dad to take away the cell phone. Go ahead.
To that, I don't know that kids even sometimes know when they are engaging in cyberbullying. So there's also some responsibility as a community that we have to educate our kids on what cyberbullying is and to teach them how to engage pro-socially and positively online.
There's a really great book called Kindness Wins. And it's a short little book and it's a little dated at this point, but I love it because it gives very specific examples of how parents can do exactly that. They can go and teach their kid by showing them, hey, look at my social media. Do you think this is cyberbullying? And it will then help them to kind of think through, okay, what is cyberbullying? Is that cyberbullying? And parents can have a discussion with their child. Also like scaffolding with them and teaching them some of those skills, which Joy will get to in just a minute. Something else, the name of the book, I'm just going to put it in there, is Kindness Wins. It was actually written by a friend of a friend up in Minnesota. Joy mentioned this too, and this has to do with the algorithms a little bit, but it's this idea of social contagion. And we know from the research, we've known for a while that particularly teenage girls, but really teenagers in general, are very socially aware. And that's part of how their brain functions at this age. But that can be dangerous when they're starting to share information with each other that can be harmful. For example, girls who are interested or have eating disorder tendencies will often share with each other techniques, and they'll find that online, and we'll have like these discussion boards where they're sharing techniques for that. Self-harm that happens with as well. I read in the, I believe it was the Wall Street Journal recently too, that TikTok has a lot of what you would think are very pro-social videos, teaching teenagers what tics are for kids who experience those. And there were particularly girls who started developing tics that had never had them before. And so one of the things that we watch for is with diagnosed problems, are these things that kids have had for a long time, or are they starting to pick them up after seeing them online and so forth? So yeah, Joy's putting in the chat there some online discussion boards. that can be dangerous for our kiddos, because there is this social contagion. They want to please each other socially, but if they're in a negative circle and our brains are just drawn to negativity and novel content, that can be dangerous for them. Problematic internet use. If you talk to teenagers about internet addiction, most of the time they're just like, yeah, you're crazy. That's just like way out there. I'm not addicted, whatever. And so you can think of problematic internet use as addiction light. We have started measuring problematic internet use instead of addiction, because the amount of kids who are truly addicted to the internet are very, very few. But there are actually quite a few who have problematic internet use. And that's, for example, that they get irritated when they get offline. They don't know how to talk to people. They interrupt things, or they aren't doing some of the things they like to do in person because they're always online.
They're experiencing anxiety because they can't play their video game and get to the next level.
Mm-hmm. Even a lot of teenagers and the college students we work with too often talk about how they need to be able to binge watch something when they're feeling anxious, and it's become a coping skill, and then they can't function without that coping mechanism. And so then that becomes problematic internet use. So those are some kind of red flag type of behaviors that we want to watch for, because problematic internet use is related to depression, anxiety, health problems. So the last one I have on here is cyber spillover. And there is not actually a lot of research on cyber spillover. We published one of the first articles on this, talking to school counselors in our very own district. But we've heard about this anecdotally for years. This idea when you talk to school folks that they say, you know, what happens on the weekend online affects the schoolroom on Monday mornings, and that there'll be fights that break out physically in the schoolroom based on drama that happened over the weekend online. And so other examples are, we had in some of our research, one girl went on vacation and she took a picture in bikini, and this is a middle schooler, that got passed around the entire school. So when she came back, she had been, you know, completely objectified by her peers, and that affected her ability to work in school because it was essentially sexual harassment. So that concept of cyber spillover is one that we are working on documenting with research, because we know anecdotally that it's there. We know from interviews that it's there, but the numbers don't say it. And usually politicians don't do much until you have some numbers to back up your stories. And so there was a researcher that I really admire quite a bit. Her name is Sonia Livingston. And Sonia Livingston said, you know, our internet is really like the new town square. But when it comes to these kinds of problems, when families go downtown, Gainesville, they don't take a shield and like armored gear with them. We have public policy in place, police officers and things that keep us safe, but we don't online. It's kind of like the wild, wild west. And that's what often like developers of games say, is that it's like, oh, well, families should protect themselves. And I think we need to start thinking about that differently. I'm almost out of time here. In fact, I want to make sure that we have enough time for
Can
questions.
I make one comment? Is that we don't have listed here on the slide online predation. So we get a lot of questions from parents about, oh, how do I protect my child from online predators? Online predators exist, and some kids are impacted by them, but it's so rare that actually it doesn't rise to the top in terms of the greatest, most common risks that we see online for our kids. And so I just wanted to point that out, that does happen, but it's such a rare event that it's actually these other risk factors online that tend to have a greater impact on the whole for, you know, our typical kids in the schools.
Joy, did you want to say anything about the online advertising before we move on?
Yeah, maybe just briefly, there's a tremendous amount of research. Actually, one of the greatest, best, most solidly documented online risks for youth behavior is exposure to marketing related to substance use products. And this has been borne out time and time again, study after study. And it's not something that we think about for our young kids, because we're not thinking about health risk behaviors in our younger kids. But in our middle school age kids and our late elementary age kids, that's when they're starting to develop ideas about things like substance use. And if the influence that they're receiving is from industry, they're going to learn things like substances are fun and everybody's happy when they're vaping, and beer tastes yummy. And so we want to make sure that we're thinking a little bit ahead in terms of what the risks are for our kids, so we can prevent some of those impacts. Kids are going to be exposed to advertising, that's going to happen, but that's where parents can play a really important role in recognizing those risks early on and addressing them in a preventative way.
So I'm just going to pause here and say that when we get to the question part, one of the first places we go is how do we monitor them and control them? And as a mom of 3 teenagers who are now like 2 of them are actually young adults, they are always 10 steps ahead of me. And I'm supposed to be an expert in this, right? I've tried, and we'll share with you some of the controls that are out there, and some of them worked when they were younger, but the older they got, the less they worked. The one thing that we always have is that our parent-child relationships. And those have been shown over and over again. If we can practice our communication skills, if we can stay chill, if we can strike a tone of curiosity with our kids and really learn from them and try to hold our tongue when we're freaking out inside, that makes more of a difference than all of the online monitoring put together. And so it's just some very basic tips to strengthen our parent-child relationships. Plan an activity with our kids, 15 minutes, even 15 minutes would work every week together, sitting down and just connecting one-on-one, having more positives, 4 or 5 positives to every negative thing that we say with to our child. And then being a model ourselves, being intentional and mindful about how we're using internet, because no matter what we say, they're going to be watching what we do a lot more than what we say. You know, and then we'll talk more about thinking about your child's stage of development throughout the presentation. But I'm going to turn the time over to Joy at this point.
Yeah, I think that's such a good lead in, Jen, because a lot of what we're going to be talking about is really based on the quality of the parent-child relationship. And so you'll be more effective at every strategy we teach you if you prioritize the quality of that relationship first. By feeding it healthy interactions and making sure that you're engaging your child in a non-judgmental way and being curious about them and their interests is a great starting point. And we have some really good research that suggests that parenting can actually make a difference. Sometimes we get overwhelmed and we think, there's so much media and technology and I don't understand it. My child is so much further along than I am and they're technological savvy. But actually you can make a difference just by restricting mature media content, by setting a house rule of no R-rated movies, has been shown to significantly reduce risk for drinking, smoking cigarettes, and using marijuana. Parents who actively engage in talking with their kids about risk behaviors online have actually been able to reduce the occurrence of those behaviors in their kids. And what we've learned from some of our studies when we talk to kids about this specifically is that they actually want your involvement in their technological lives. As kids get older, they develop hindsight in realizing how risky some of the things were that they had done before. So when we've talked to older kids, we learn, they really wish that their parents had been more involved and had been more clear about expectations and rules in the home, or especially around technology. Younger kids tend towards wanting more freedom. So they'll say, all my friends have smartphones or whatever, so I want a smartphone. But older kids realize it was really helpful to have their parents' involvement in some of their technological experiences. So if you can just hold tight and maintain that positive relationship, your kids will appreciate the efforts that you're making on their behalf. We can go to the next one. So we have this like very simple model. It's called tech parenting. It's an acronym, and tech is the acronym. So T stands for talking with your child about media. One of the most important things when you're engaging with your kids is to develop an open communication style with them about what they're doing on media. How are they using media? What are they seeing? What are they being exposed to? And if you can approach that conversation in an open way, with low judgment and curiosity, your children will guide you. They will teach you, they will show you things, and you'll learn about their online world. And what we're starting to see is that kids are in this process now with the infusion of technology in their lives, where they're developing their identities in the built world, in their face-to-face interactions, and then they have a whole separate identity. Sometimes it's very similar, sometimes it's very different, that's developing online. And if you want to know that child, if you want to know who your child is online, you have to be able to talk to them about how they're using media. So we recommend, having periodic conversations with your children, maybe just in the car ride home or over dinner, and just ask them, like, what do you like watching on TV? What do you watch when you go over to your friend's house? What kind of apps? Show me that new app. I don't understand it. I'd like to understand how you're using it. Send me a funny meme. Show me how to make a meme. There's things you can do with your kids and ways that they can teach you about their online behavior that will show you what they're doing. And if you involve yourself in their lives in that way, there'll be more adults present, like that town square that Jen was referencing, will be more present in their online communities. The next thing is E, which stands for educate your children about risks in the media. Sometimes we describe media to families as it can be, this wonderful resource, this fantastic tool that can teach them new things and give them entire worlds of information that we didn't have before. It can also serve as a sort of delinquent super peer. It can show them behaviors that we wouldn't want them to be exposed to. It can show them content that we weren't ready for them to be exposed to. So kids can learn about behaviors before maybe it's developmentally appropriate. And we really want to be educating them on what's out there in the media, and is it accurate? Is it real? Is it safe? So things like marketing around something like alcohol. What we've learned is a lot of alcohol marketing overrepresents the positives of alcohol use and underrepresents the negatives. Even alcohol campaigns that are industry sponsored, that are designed to be campaigns to prevent underage drinking, have actually shown to increase underage drinking. So we want to make sure that we are encouraging kids to be good consumers of the media that they are seeing. So we might ask questions when they're being exposed to an alcohol ad on TV about, how accurate was that? What do you think the risks might be if somebody were to be drinking that much? You can also talk to them about their privacy. Sometimes kids don't understand digital privacy. Sometimes they don't know that once you put a picture out on the internet, it's lost, that you actually don't have control over it anymore. So they might need some education around that as well. The number of cases that I've seen in clinic of adolescents who have had a picture of themselves that they sent to maybe their boyfriend that then got sent to the entire school is really upsetting. It's a problem that keeps happening over and over again, and it's really damaging to kids when that happens. So we want to educate our kids on the fact that, once you put something out on the internet, it might no longer be yours. So we want to be thinking about those risks and working hard to educate our kids and educate ourselves on, what those risks might be. The next thing is, this is really about getting back into our space on co-using kids. We want to be present in their media environments and their tech environments. So what we like to recommend is that parents co-use or co-view media with your child actively. So what that means is you friend them on social media. You follow them on social media. You show them how to be positive engagers with social media. You watch TV with them. You watch TV and discuss what you're seeing together, so that it's a socially engaged, positive, interactive style of using things together. So you learn about what they're doing, but you're also showing them, you're modeling for them how to behave in the online environment. And then the last step is setting clear and effective house rules. It just so happened that this fell at the end of the acronym, but it's really good that it did, because you really need that warm and compassionate and collaborative parent-child relationship to be effective at setting house rules. And so it's great if you can be exceptionally clear with your kids about where they're allowed to use media, when they're allowed to use media, and how they should be using media in the household as well as beyond the household. And there's some really great tools to support your development of effective house rules. One of those tools we'll talk about in a little bit, but it's the home media plan that's developed by the American Academy of Pediatrics. And you want to make sure that when you're thinking about rules, especially related to media consumption, that they relate back to those risks that we were talking about at the beginning. So things like you want to limit kids' exposure to mature media content, and you want to guide them on what they should do if they are exposed to mature media content. Do you want them to show it to you? Do you want them to block whoever it is that's sending that or wherever they're seeing that? Do you want to restrict some access around whatever app it is that's allowing them to have that exposure? So, and we want to be very, very specific with our rules. A lot of our young people who we've interviewed have told us, yeah, my parents have rules, but they're sort of vague. It's like, be appropriate online. And so being appropriate online could mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. So we want to be specific, use kind words, don't post, images of your body. You want to be very specific. I don't want you to watch, R-rated or PG-13 movies. The more specific we can be, the better we are at setting our kids up for success and following through on the rules that we have. All right, so the next, this is just sort of a simple model. We got a lot of questions about sort of when is it appropriate for my child to get a smartphone, or when should I allow my middle schooler to get on social media? And that's a really tough question because it's so child dependent. Just like we might have different rules or different times that we might allow our children to walk themselves to school or to sleep over at a friend's house, depending on their skill level. We also should have different expectations for our kids on what's age appropriate based on their skills. So do they understand digital privacy? Is that something that they can understand? If it's not something they can understand, they maybe shouldn't have access to social media sites where they can reveal a lot of private information and lose their access to that private information. We also get a lot of questions about how much time, should we allow our kids to be on media? That's tough too, because, with the pandemic, almost all of their time was spent on computers and online. We typically recommend that the time be balanced, that if your kid is spending way, way too much time online and not moving their bodies to get active or not engaging with their peers face to face, they might miss out on some opportunities. But there's plenty of good that can happen online as well, and they can have lots and lots of access to positive things too, which leads to the last thing, which is we want to be mindful of content. Content is more important than time in terms of youth outcomes. So we want to be promoting positive content for our kids. We want them to be creative, like Jen was saying. We want them to be socially connected. We want them to be technologically savvy because they're growing up in a technologically infused world. But we also want to be mindful that they're going to have some exposures to things that might be problematic for them. They might be exposed to sexual content at a very young age. They might be exposed to alcohol or vaping marketing at a young age. And so we want to try our best to restrict their exposure to that content by limiting mature media access, but also helping them understand and evaluate that content in a way that promotes some positive media literacy skills. Things like recognizing when something is an advertisement versus not is helpful for kids. Recognizing when the content might not be very realistic can be helpful for kids. Recognizing when content is inappropriate can be helpful for kids as well, and understanding, how should they manage their own digital privacy. We can go to the next one. So we talked a little bit about this.
And we had several questions that fell into 3 broad themes in the questions that were given to us ahead of time. And we thought before taking individual questions that we would share some some resources for you all along these lines. And the first one was this bit on age appropriateness. And we got a couple of questions like, which social media is appropriate for middle school? What social media platforms do you recommend for middle versus high school kids? And which ones should be avoided? And I think there's a really good site, and I don't know if it would be worth the time to jump on here, but this Common Sense Media site, you can look up movies, TV, books, apps, and games, and it will give you reviews on almost everything. So for example, oops, sorry. I lost my screen. One of our parents asked us about Roblox. Well, there's an ultimate guide to Roblox on Common Sense Media. And Joy and I aren't experts on Roblox, but you can actually go on to Common Sense Media and look up almost any app you have a question about. So we wanted to share that with you because we're not an expert on every single app out there, but this site is.
And they also offer through this site articles on how to content restrict across. Every app is different and every platform is different and every technological device is different. So we can't provide recommendations on how to block content for every single thing, but Common Sense Media does have some resources on that. And there are other resources that you can find online through the American Psychological Association as well that have articles that talk about like a parent's guide to TikTok, like how to content restrict and how to monitor your child's behavior there. So I would say probably have conversations with your kids about what kinds of things they're using and be aware of what kind of things they're using and get yourself familiar and try to gain expertise on those particular apps so that you can then learn, what might I need to be aware of in terms of the risks here.
The next set of questions were on safety monitoring. And this is always a really popular question whenever we give this presentation. People are like, what can I do to control the environment my kids are in? And that really depends on age. We do have a slide here that gives you several of the most common and the ones that we think are the best tools for technology monitoring. But we do have some guidance that goes along with that.
Yeah, one of the things is we feel very strongly, and the literature supports this as well as our clinical practice. If you engage in monitoring as you should with your child, that monitoring behavior should be scaffolded based on their age and developmental level. So younger kids and kids new to technology are going to need more monitoring. Older kids and kids more familiar with technology may have developed the skills where they don't require as much monitoring. The other thing is, if you engage in monitoring your child's, well, I say your child's device, but I'll say something else about that in a minute. If you engage in monitoring devices used by your child, you should let them know. It should be an open conversation. They should know that you're tracking them or watching what they're doing. There's two reasons for this. One is because inevitably you're going to come across content that they shouldn't have on there. And you're going to have a conversation with them about it. And it will be way easier to have that conversation if they already knew that you were monitoring their device. The second reason is just them knowing that you're monitoring their device will keep them a little bit less engaged in risky behavior. So knowing mom and dad are watching my phone is a way for me to communicate to my friends, hey, don't send me that stuff. My parents are monitoring my phone. And it can be protective for your kids if they have that as a sort of fallback protection that they already know about on their device. And they will engage in less risky behavior knowing that you potentially could see it. The thing I want to mention about the devices is you're purchasing the device for your kids most of the time. You're paying for their phone plans. So sometimes it can be helpful to talk about the device as if it's yours that your child is borrowing. And so if it's my device, then I get to set the rules on how the device is used, where it's used, and what kind of content is on that device. That can actually be very important if mature content, like kids are sending maybe pictures of one another around, that can become a legal issue for you if it's your phone that you own. So having that conversation with your child about, this is the device that maybe is my device that you're borrowing, or it's a device that I'm monitoring because I'm managing the device. and I want you to have it. I want you to have access to it to be able to use it in a positive way. But keep in mind that, it's my iPad or it's my smartphone. And so, I'm going to be checking in on it and making sure that the content on there is good and appropriate for you.
I know there's a trend for younger kids to get flip phones instead of smartphones. That might be something to think about for younger ones. I really do like Disney Circle for the younger kids, middle school age and younger. The other one that was, we relied on Microsoft Family, and now Apple has monitoring that you can set up within those devices. For example, Microsoft Family will go on multiple devices with your content that you have set up, and you can make that different for each child. Bark is another one that I like because it uses an algorithm to flag you if there's problematic content. So if if the word suicide comes up, if there's substance use terms that are coming up in their conversations, and the teenagers will tell us, especially the older that they get, like, oh, Bark flags everything and I can't even joke around. But it's impossible for parents to keep up. If teens are spending 7 hours a day, there's no way we have time to review all that. So Bark has an algorithm that does that and only flags parents if there's problematic content. So those are a couple of my favorites. But again, I strongly believe that the relationship is more important than the monitoring.
It's also about, real quick, just the culture that you set in your home. So, we didn't talk about bedtime, but smartphones do interfere with kids' bedtimes. And if you can set a culture in your home that we all plug in our devices in a central location, an hour or two before bedtime, you won't have that same fight that happens about, please get off your phone, it's 2 a.m. in the morning. The other thing is the most problematic behavior that I see in my adolescent clinic on smartphones happens late at night. So if you can reduce the late night time that your kids are engaging in terms of their online behaviors, that will reduce some of the more problematic behaviors that happen with peers, as well as problematic behaviors that happen with exposure to mature media content. Location tracking. So there's a question in the chat about why should location tracking be turned off. Many apps have an automatic location tracker that is instigated as soon as you sign into the app, and you have to actively go in. So Snapchat is a perfect example. When I first was using Snapchat, was trying to figure it out and didn't realize that it was pinging my exact location to everyone in Snapchat, in the Snapchat world, until I went in and saw that there is a way to shut that filter off. So your child can be tracked by any other person using Snapchat, their exact location, if they haven't turned off that location tracking aspect. I know some parents have smartphones with their kids because they want to be able to know where their kid is for safety reasons. And I totally understand that. There's other ways to do that through sharing within your own contacts versus letting the apps track their location so other people know where they are.
So this is a place where you can actually go. The family media plan is what Joy mentioned earlier, that the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends and that they put together for you. It's a place where you can go and talk through with your kids and choose what's your family values. And it's so important, especially with older teenagers, that they're part of that conversation. But you can make those rules together, and this family media plan makes it really easy for you to step through that process together so that you can decide, what time does the technology get plugged in? What are the places that we're not going to have technology? Is that going to be dinner time? Is that going to be, at breakfast time? Whatever you guys decide as a family, because every family is different. So we have a bit of time here at the end. We've answered a few questions in the chat, but we wanted to turn off the recording and make sure that you have an opportunity.